Along the western edge of America, there is a place where the land does not surrender to the sea. It fights it. For 363 miles, the Oregon coast throws itself against the Pacific Ocean. Basalt towers rise straight out of the surf. Sand dunes climb 500 feet into the sky, and the largest waves on the continent break against headlands that have stood for 17 million years. But the most remarkable thing about this coastline is not its scale, it is who it belongs to. Because here, unlike almost anywhere else in the United States, every single beach belongs to the public, all 363 miles, free, open, and protected forever. And the story of how that came to be is one of the strangest political battles in American history. This is a coast of ghosts and giants, of shipwrecks half buried in the sand, of a desert that inspired one of the greatest science fiction novels ever written, of a meteorite worth a fortune that vanished and was never found. This journey will traverse the entire length of the Oregon coast, from the mouth of a great river in the north, to the wild and forgotten edges of the south, past the most photographed rock on the west coast, into a sea cave the size of a cathedral, and along a stretch of road that many believe is the most beautiful drive in America. This is the Oregon coast, and it begins where the continent runs out of land. The journey begins in the north, in a town built on the edge of one of the most dangerous river mouths in the world. Astoria is the oldest American settlement west of the Rocky Mountains. Founded in 1811, it sits where the mighty Columbia River finally meets the Pacific Ocean after a journey of more than 1,000 miles, and for centuries, this meeting point has tested everyone who dared to cross it. Sailors gave this place a grim name, the Graveyard of the Pacific. Where the river's current collides with the ocean's swell, the water turns violent and unpredictable. Researchers estimate that more than 2,000 ships have been lost near the mouth of the Columbia. The sea here does not forgive mistakes, but long before the ships came, this was a place of arrival. In the winter of 1805, two explorers named Meriwether Lewis and William Clark reached this coast. They had walked across an entire continent, following the promise of a route to the Pacific. And here, near Astoria, they built a small fort of logs and waited out the long, wet Oregon winter. They called it Fort Clatsop, after the native people who had lived on this land for thousands of years. Today, a careful reconstruction of that fort still stands among the spruce. Visitors walk the same damp ground, and historians note that the explorers recorded rain on all but 12 days of their stay. The Oregon coast introduced itself to them, it seems, with weather. A short drive west, the past becomes even more visible. On the beach at Fort Stevens lies the skeleton of the Peter Iredale, a sailing ship that ran aground in 1906. More than a century later, its rusted iron frame still rises from the sand, slowly returning to the sea. It has become one of the most photographed shipwrecks in America, a quiet monument to the graveyard of the Pacific. Above the town, on the highest hill, stands the Astoria column, a tower wrapped in spiraling murals that tell the region's history. Climb its 164 steps, and on a clear day, the entire mouth of the Columbia opens beneath you. River, ocean, and forest, all meeting at the corner of a continent. From here, Highway 101 turns south, and the coast begins to reveal what it is truly famous for. Just south of Astoria stands the image that for many people is the Oregon coast. It is called Haystack Rock, a monolith of dark basalt rising 235 feet above the beach at Cannon Beach that is taller than a 20-story building, standing alone at the edge of the sea. And at low tide, you can walk right up to its base across the wet sand. But Haystack Rock is far older than it looks. Geologists explain that it was born around 17 million years ago, when enormous flows of lava poured across the land from hundreds of miles inland, following the path of an ancient river all the way to the sea. That lava cooled into hard basalt, and over millions of years, the softer rock around it eroded away, leaving this single dramatic tower behind. What you see today is the survivor, the piece too stubborn to wash away. At its base lies a hidden world. The tide pools around Haystack Rock are one of Oregon's protected marine gardens, alive with sea stars, anemones, chitons, and crabs. Reach out to touch nothing. The rules here are strict, because this is one of the richest pockets of life on the entire coast. And above the waterline, on the grassy slopes of the rock, lives one of its most beloved residents. Each spring, the tufted puffins return, squat black seabirds with brilliant orange bills and golden tufts of feather above the eyes. They arrive around April and dig burrows into the soft soil at the top of the rock, raising their chicks through the summer before vanishing back out to sea. Haystack Rock offers the most accessible place to see these birds anywhere in the Northwest. But there is a quieter truth here too. Researchers report that tufted puffin numbers have fallen sharply along this coast in recent decades. The bright little birds of Haystack Rock are part of a population in trouble, and their presence each spring is no longer something to take for granted. For those who recognize this place but cannot say why, there is a reason. Haystack Rock has appeared in films for decades, most famously in the 1980s adventure movie The Goonies. It has become one of the most photographed natural landmarks in the United States. Just up the road, the cliffs of Equal Estate Park offer a different view of the same coastline. Wild, forested headlands where the land falls away into the surf, and a few miles south, at a quiet spot called Hug Point, the relentless ocean has carved caves and small waterfalls into the rock, and even left the faint traces of an old road once used by stagecoaches at low tide. The northern coast is dramatic and well-loved, but to find the places where the land bends and twists into something stranger, the journey has to leave the main highway behind. Between the towns of Tillamook and Pacific City, Highway 101 turns inland, but those who know the coast take a different route, a winding detour called the Three Capes Scenic Loop, where the road clings to the very edge of the land. The first cape is Cape Meares. Here stands one of the shortest lighthouses on the Oregon coast, perched on a headland high above the waves. Nearby grows a strange and famous tree known as the octopus tree, a giant Sitka spruce whose massive limbs spread outward from its base like the arms of a sea creature instead of growing straight up. Researchers believe native peoples may have shaped it centuries ago. No one knows for certain. The tree keeps its secret. The second cape is Cape Lookout, a finger of land that juts 2 miles straight out into the Pacific. Walk its forest trail to the tip, and the ocean surrounds you on 3 sides, with nothing but water between you and the horizon. On clear days, travelers report seeing the spouts of migrating gray whales far below. The third cape is Cape Kiwanda, a headland of soft golden sandstone sculpted by wind and water into smooth flowing shapes. Beside it rises a towering sand dune, and beyond it, in the water, stands yet another haystack rock. This stretch of coast feels carved by an artist's hand. But this region is famous for something beyond its capes. Behind the headlands lie rolling green pastures, fed by constant coastal rain, and on those pastures graze the dairy cows that made this place a household name. The town of Tillamook has been making cheese here since the 1890s. Today the creamery produces over 1 million pounds of cheese every week, and travelers pour in by the thousands to watch it being made and to taste the ice cream that locals have loved for generations. For many families, no trip down the Oregon coast is complete without a stop here. The coast feeds the senses in more ways than one. The Three Capes Loop is a reminder that on the Oregon coast, the most beautiful path is rarely the fastest one, and the next stop on the journey is a town that has built its entire identity around a single gentle giant of the sea. Continuing south, the highway reaches a town that claims 2 remarkable titles. This is Depoe Bay, and tucked behind its seawall is what locals call the smallest navigable harbor in the world. A pocket of protected water just 6 acres in size, connected to the open ocean by a channel so narrow that watching a fishing boat thread through it feels like watching a needle being threaded by the sea itself. Along the seawall, the ocean performs a trick. At high tide, waves force seawater up through natural openings in the rock, sending sudden plumes bursting into the air. These are the spouting horns of Depoe Bay, and visitors gather along the wall to watch the Pacific breathe. But the real reason people come here swims just offshore. Depoe Bay calls itself the whale-watching capital of the Oregon coast, and it has earned the name. Each year, around 20,000 gray whales pass along this coastline, traveling between the cold feeding waters of the Arctic and the warm lagoons of Mexico, where they give birth. It is one of the longest migrations of any mammal on Earth, a round trip of roughly 10,000 miles. Most travel past between December and the spring, but here something unusual happens. A small group of gray whales, perhaps 200 of them, has decided not to leave. These resident whales linger off the Oregon coast from spring through autumn, feeding close to shore, which means that at Depoe Bay, the giants of the Pacific can be seen for much of the year, sometimes just beyond the surf. On the bluff above the town sits a free whale watching center, where trained volunteers help visitors spot the spouts and tails offshore. It is one of the great quiet pleasures of this coast, standing at the edge of the continent, scanning the horizon, and waiting for something enormous and ancient to rise from the deep. From here, the coast leads to one of its largest and most storied towns. The town of Newport is where the working life of the Oregon coast comes fully into view. Its historic bayfront is still a genuine fishing port. Sea lions sprawl across the docks, barking and jostling for space. The smell of salt and diesel hangs in the air, and the boats that line the harbor still go out for crab and fish, just as they have for generations. This is not a coast frozen for tourists. It is a coast that still works. But Newport guards two great lights. To the north stands Heceta Head Lighthouse. At 93 feet, it is the tallest lighthouse on the entire Oregon coast. It was first lit in 1873, and its beam still turns above a headland alive with tide pools and seabirds. At its base, at low tide, the rocky shelves fill with starfish and anemones, and harbor seals haul out on the rocks just offshore. And in the town itself stands the older Heceta Bay Lighthouse, a modest wooden structure that has gathered, over the years, a reputation for being haunted. Its windows glow at dusk, and the stories told about it have become part of the local lore. Whether or not you believe in ghosts, the little lighthouse has watched over this bay for more than 150 years. Newport is also home to one of the finest aquariums on the West Coast. Visitors walk through glass tunnels as sharks pass overhead, watch sea otters tumble through the water, and come face to face with the giant Pacific octopus, a creature of startling intelligence that can solve puzzles and recognize human faces. A short drive north lies one of the coast's strangest formations. It is called the Devil's Punch Bowl, a great hollow bowl of rock, open to the sea, where incoming waves rush in and churn violently inside the basin. Geologists believe it was once a sea cave, whose roof collapsed long ago, leaving this roaring cauldron of seawater behind. At high tide, in a storm, it seems to boil. The coast is beginning to show its wilder side, and just to the south waits the place where the Pacific Ocean unleashes its full and terrifying power. South of Newport, near the small town of Yahots, the coastline rears up into something monumental. This is Cape Perpetua, a forested headland that towers more than 800 feet above the ocean. It is the highest viewpoint you can reach by car on the entire Oregon coast. From the overlook at its summit, the Pacific stretches to the curve of the earth, and on a clear day you can see for miles in every direction. Behind the headland grows an ancient forest, where Sitka spruce have stood for centuries, and along the shore below, archaeologists have found shell middens, great mounds of shells left by the native peoples who gathered and feasted here for thousands of years. This was a place of abundance long before it became a place of awe. But people come to Cape Perpetua to witness something violent. At the base of the cape lies one of the most photographed and most dangerous spots on the coast, a place locals call the drain pipe of the Pacific. It is known as Thor's Well. From a distance, it looks like a hole in the rock that swallows the sea. As each wave rolls in, water pours down into the well and vanishes. Then, with a roar, the pressure forces it back up and out, exploding into the air. In truth, Thor's Well is a collapsed sea cave. Its roof fell in long ago, leaving an opening that the ocean now fills and empties, over and over, in a hypnotic and merciless rhythm. It is mesmerizing, and it has proven deadly. The rocks around Thor's Well are slick with spray, and the waves are powerful enough to sweep a person from their feet. Those who know this coast give it the respect it demands, and never turn their back on the sea. Nearby, the ocean carves another spectacle, the Devil's Churn, a long, narrow chasm where the sea rushes inland through a crack in the volcanic rock. When the waves arrive, the water funnels into the gap and erupts, sometimes shooting straight up into the air with a sound like thunder. Like Thor's Well, it likely began as a sea cave, slowly opened and torn apart by the patience of the waves. This is the Oregon coast at its most elemental. Rock against water, land against ocean, a battle with no end. And standing here, watching the Pacific pour itself into the stone, it becomes clear why sailors feared this coast. and why those who built their lives upon it needed help to survive. That help came in the form of a light. Just south of Cape Perpetua, on a high green headland above the sea, stands what many call the most beautiful lighthouse in America. This is Heceta Head Lighthouse. Its white tower rises against the dark forest and the endless ocean, and its image has been captured so many times that it is often described as the most photographed lighthouse in the United States. To stand before it is to understand why. The light was first lit in 1894. Built to guide ships through one of the most treacherous stretches of the Pacific, its beam remains the strongest on the Oregon coast, visible from 21 miles out to sea. For well over a century, that light has swept the darkness, a fixed point of safety on a coastline that had claimed so many. Beside the tower stands the old keeper's house, built in the same era. In the days before automation, lighthouse keepers and their families lived here in deep isolation, tending the light through storms and fog, far from any town. The remoteness brought hardship, and historians record real tragedy among those early keepers. Today, that same house has been lovingly restored, and now welcomes guests as a bed and breakfast, where visitors can sleep beside the working light. But just 2 miles up the road lies a wonder of a different kind. Hidden inside the headland is the largest sea cave in the United States, a cavern so vast it could hold a building many stories tall, and it is far from empty. This is the home of the stellar sea lions. Hundreds of these enormous animals gather inside the cave and on the rocks outside it, especially in the autumn and winter. The largest males can weigh over 1,000 pounds. Their roars echo off the stone walls in a deep primal chorus, and the smell and the sound together make the cave feel like another world entirely. Visitors descend by elevator deep into the rock to witness it, watching from inside the cliff as the sea lions live their wild lives just beyond the railing. Heceta Head marks a turning point on the journey. To the north lies the rugged, rocky coast of headlands and lighthouses, but to the south, the land begins to change. The cliffs give way, and something almost impossible rises in their place, a desert by the sea. For nearly 40 miles along the central Oregon coast, the rocky cliffs disappear, and in their place rises one of the most surprising landscapes in all of America. These are the Oregon Dunes, the largest expanse of coastal sand dunes in North America. Mountains of sand, some of them climbing as high as 500 feet above the sea. Stand among them, with the wind erasing your footprints behind you, and you could believe you had been transported to the Sahara. Yet the Pacific Ocean lies just beyond the next ridge. How did a desert form on one of the rainiest coasts in the country? Geologists explain that it is the work of wind, water, and deep time. For thousands of years, the ocean has ground down rock into sand and cast it onto these shores. And here, where the land lies low and flat instead of rising into cliffs, the wind has been free to push that sand far inland, building it into vast shifting hills. The dunes are still moving today, reshaped by every storm. But these are not lifeless sands. Tucked between the dunes lie hidden lakes and pockets of forest, islands of green in a sea of sand. Rare birds nest here, and among them is the western snowy plover, a small pale shorebird that lays its eggs directly on the open sand. It is a threatened species, and much of these dunes is now carefully protected to give the little birds a chance to survive. And there is one more secret buried in this sand. In the 1950s, a writer came to the Oregon dunes and stood among these endless shifting hills. He became fascinated by the way the sand moved, the way it could swallow whole forests, the way an entire landscape could be shaped by wind. That writer was Frank Herbert. The desert he imagined, inspired in part by these very dunes, became the setting for one of the greatest science fiction novels ever written. A book called Dune, the arid, sand-swept world of that story, beloved by millions and brought to the screen for new generations, has its roots here, on the Oregon coast. Walk these dunes at sunset, and it is not hard to see the alien world he envisioned. The Oregon dunes are a place of strange and shifting beauty, a reminder that this coast is always changing, always in motion, and as the journey continues south, the rocks return, and the coast saves some of its finest treasures for last. As the journey enters the southern coast, the crowds thin, and the landscape grows wilder and more remote. The town of Bandon sits where the Coquille River meets the sea, and its beach is one of the most beautiful on the entire Oregon coast. Here, scattered across the sand and rising from the surf, stands a gallery of sea stacks, the eroded remains of an ancient shoreline. At low tide you can wander among them. At sunset they turn to silhouettes against a burning sky. The most famous of these is Face Rock, and the native Coquille people told a story about it. They said the rock was once a young woman named Iwana, who waded into the sea one night and was seized by an evil ocean spirit. To this day, the legend says her face remains turned up toward the sky, frozen in stone, gazing forever at the moon. Look at the rock from the right angle, and you can see her there, a face looking upward, waiting. Bandon holds another quiet magic. On certain mornings, when the tide is right, local artists walk the beach and rake enormous, intricate labyrinths into the sand. Visitors are invited to walk the winding paths in silence, a slow and meditative journey, knowing that within hours the rising tide will erase the whole creation. Here, even the art belongs to the sea. Further south, the coast keeps its most theatrical secret for storm season. At a place called Shore Acres, perched on sandstone cliffs above the Pacific, winter storms drive waves into the rock with such force that the spray erupts more than 50 feet into the air, sometimes far higher. Travelers gather behind a sheltered overlook to watch the ocean throw itself against the land, while just behind them, in a startling contrast, bloom the formal gardens that a timber baron planted here over a century ago. Wild fury and quiet beauty, side by side. And near the old fishing town of Port Orford lies the very edge of the state. Cape Blanco, one of the westernmost points in the continental United States, where a lighthouse has stood since 1870, weathering some of the fiercest winds on the coast. Port Orford holds a genuine mystery too. In 1856, a man claimed to have found an enormous meteorite in the hills nearby, a mass of iron and stone weighing many thousands of pounds, but he could never lead anyone back to it. To this day, the lost Port Orford meteorite has never been found, and treasure hunters still search the hills chasing a fortune that may not exist at all. The wild south is a coast of legends, and it builds toward a final stretch of road that many travelers call the most beautiful drive in all of America. Near the southern end of the Oregon coast, just before the California border, the road enters a final breathtaking stretch. It is called the Samuel H. Boardman State Scenic Corridor. 12 miles of coastline so dramatic that many who have driven the entire coast call it the most beautiful part of all. It was named for the first superintendent of Oregon State Parks, a man who fought to save this shoreline for the public and who once dreamed of making it a national park. The corridor winds through a forest of ancient Sitka spruce, some of them 300 years old. And between the trees, again and again, the ocean appears below, filled with sea stacks and hidden coves. The Oregon Coast Trail threads through these woods, and every turn seems to reveal a new and impossible view. The most famous stop is called Natural Bridges. Here, from a wooden platform on the cliff edge, you look down on a cluster of stone arches, carved by the sea straight through the rock. The waves pass beneath them, and the whole scene looks less like a place on Earth and more like a painting. It is without question one of the most photographed spots on the Oregon coast. A little further on, a faint and unmarked trail drops down through the forest. Follow it, and it leads to a place called Secret Beach, a hidden cove ringed by towering sea stacks, where a small waterfall sometimes spills directly onto the sand. It is the kind of place that feels like a reward, earned only by those willing to leave the road and walk into the trees. The corridor also crosses the highest bridge in all of Oregon. The Thomas Creek Bridge soars 345 feet above a forested canyon, carrying the highway over a gorge that plunges toward the sea. And at a windswept place called Indian Sands, the journey touches its deepest history. Here, among strange wind-carved sandstone bluffs, archaeologists have found evidence of human presence stretching back 10 to 12,000 years, People stood on this very coast at the end of the last ice age, watching the same ocean break against the same shore. The Oregon coast has been a place of wonder for as long as there have been people to wonder at it. The Boardman Corridor is the grand finale of the Oregon coast. 12 miles where every element of this journey, the forests, the cliffs, the sea stacks, the ancient human story, comes together at once. And as the road carries on toward the border, the coast prepares to say farewell. From the mouth of a great river in the north to the wild and forgotten edges of the south, the Oregon coast runs for 363 miles, and along its entire length, it never stops changing. It is a coast of towering rock and shifting sand, of working harbors and haunted lighthouses, of whales rising from the deep and puffins returning each spring, and a desert that gave the world an entire imagined universe. It is a coast where the ocean carves caves and swallows them, where the land has been worn and shaped for 17 million years, and where people have stood in wonder for 12,000. But perhaps the most extraordinary thing about this coastline remains the simplest. Every grain of this sand, every tide pool, every wild and beautiful mile of it belongs to everyone, protected decades ago by people who understood that some places are too precious to be owned by a few. They called it the People's Coast, and it still is. The waves that break here tonight have traveled across an entire ocean to arrive, and tomorrow they will do it all again. The Oregon coast does not perform for anyone. It simply endures, wild and free, at the edge of the continent. It is waiting, at the place where the land runs out and the wild begins.